George had always been a dainty boy, thin and shy and easily flustered. He always did his work just as he was supposed to, and the moment his school art classes started allowing creativity, his work was unbelievable. He would follow every rule ever set for him, and it wasn't even because of the strictness of his parents. His parents were formal, sure, and maybe they didn't teach him everything there was to know about the world, but they surely weren't neglectful and they surely loved their dear son. On top of this, he had grown up in a very secluded private school. It was a Catholic school, of the church that his family would attend frequently and were very involved in for most of his life. This prevented him from getting much outside interaction with other students, the only other kids in the private school being just as closed off from the world as he was. It wasn't until he was 15 years old that he had started to make a conclusion about why he never seemed to see a future for himself with a girl, and related it to the way he had felt about his best friend from grade 6. Not long after he started questioning this, a perfect opportunity rose for him to find out more about it. School, of course. It was the largely anticipated sex ed day, where all students of grade 9 would be divided by their gender and sent to learn both about the puberty of the opposite gender, and a basic rundown of how sex would work. The school only did this day because it was mandatory by law, not because any of the staff felt it necessary. These reasons, mixed with the fact that it was a Catholic school after all, were the reason George had been terrified back into hiding after he raised his hand during the questions category of the sex talk. Does a boy always have to be with a girl? Is it possible for girls to like girls or for boys to like boys? His young voice had been so curious, so unique, so naive. He had yet to go through a change in his voice, something the puberty talk had taught him was normal for now but should change in the near future. The woman who had taught the group of boys the basics of female puberty had snapped her head up from her seat at a table on the side, where she sat still in front of the class but no longer speaking. The large man, whose job it actually had been to speak in that moment, looked down at his feet and straightened out his expression after releasing a short but hefty chuckle from his chest. It felt degrading. "Mr. Davidson, no inappropriate questions please. You know better than that." I am sorry sir. I didn't mean to be inappropriate. I just didn't understand." "I still don't." He was confused, his brows were drawn together and his toes curled from within his shoes. "George," the teacher paused to sigh, "no, a relationship is between a man and a woman. That is why they are so vastly different. A man was made to be part of the puzzle and woman was made to complete him. Without a man, a woman would be too fragile, and without a woman, a man would be too strong. Never in your life shall any of you be engaging in any sort of homosexual or transvestite activity, lest you burn in hell in eternal damnation by the Lord himself." "Any more questions?" He gave George a very intense glare throughout the entire speech, slowly looking away at the end, arms crossed and pacing the front of the classroom. George wanted to curl up under the desk and die. He wanted to run out of the classroom and out of the building, hide in a tree, and call his mummy until she came to pick him up. Instead, he just stared at his desk, following the pattern of the dark wood with his eyes. He pinched harshly at his own thigh to fight back tears, sending a glance to the boy sitting next to him. His best friend, his only friend, and crush looked back at him with a disgruntled expression. "What the heck, George? Your parents never taught you about the fags." That was what broke him. The harsh look in the eye of the boy he had loved, the only person he'd ever had romantic feelings for, his best friend, muttering a word to him that he had only heard around a few times. He hadn't known what it meant before, but he could surely gather the context and make an inference now. George's brown eyes stung as the cold blue gaze of his friend looked at him with judgment. He didn't know what exactly was happening to him, but his vision began to fade to black and white and become fuzzy. He had to leave, it was urgent and there was no way to stop it. George put a limp hand around the strap of his blue backpack, picking it up in a swift motion as he scrambled to his feet. Everybody turned to look at him, and he stumbled over his first step. "Mr. Davidson, I am going to have to ask you to." The booming voice of the man at the front of the room had began, but it faded out as George's hearing was replaced with a loud ring. Before he could decide his next move, he ran. His legs would stutter and slip like a young deer taking its first steps, but they were rapid, and they got him out of the room in time. The heavy metal door had slammed shut behind him, but he couldn't bring himself to care at all as he ran to the bathroom. He sat over the toilet, feeling dizzy and nauseous, for a good 10 minutes before he felt himself started to ease up. He didn't end up throwing up, which was a huge relief to him as he pulled his phone out of his pocket and dialed his mother. Mom, I don't know what to do. I can't really explain it, but something happened and I'm feeling sick and George choked out through heavy tears, trying his hardest to take deep breaths but only really making pathetic wheezes. His mother had not asked for a further explanation once she heard the distress in the voice of her sweet boy, grabbing her keys and sprinting to the car as she heard him cry to himself. "Stay on the phone with me, Angel, I'll be there as quickly as I can be." George had soon calmed down and explained what had happened, and at first his mother wore a confused expression as she thought her son had been this distressed just from embarrassment about feeling dumb. George noticed her confused expression and took a deep, shaky breath. Through tears, he told her the truth, almost in a whisper. "Mom, I think that I like boys." The pain in his eyes was so deep you could feel it, as he waited in horror, expecting her to lash out completely on him and make things a million times worse. Instead, what had happened was George being pulled out of the Catholic school and the family resigning from the church altogether. His family began to put in effort to understand his feelings and grow together, keeping him comfortable and keeping themselves in the loop. They homeschooled him for about 2 years after that. As he approached his final year, though, he began to beg and plead his parents to enroll him in a normal school, just for one final year. His parents had been terrified of this idea, of course, but they recognized how shut off he had been from the world and they also weren't having the easiest time trying to help him with calculus, so they decided to try it out. In January of George's second to last year, it was confirmed that the following year would be spent in a real public secondary school.